Okay, let me paint you a little picture. You spent years preparing for this. The degree, the internships, maybe a language course or two, possibly a volunteer placement that cost more than it paid, but everyone said you needed the field experience, so you went ahead. And then you got in. And somewhere between your first real assignment and your third project cycle, something shifted. Not wrong exactly, just complicated in ways nobody had prepared you for. Like you've been handed a map to a place that had already changed. Here's what I've come to think. There are things you learn about international development, and there are things you only learn once you're inside it. This video is about the second kind. Here's the story most people are told about building a career in this sector. You find your why, you match it to a technical specialty, public health, gender equality, food security, humanitarian response, education. You get the right degree, ideally a master's from a reputable institution. You do some field work, you build a network, and then you build a career doing work that actually means something. The sector is hard to break into, yes, but once you're in, the rewards are real. The work is purposeful, you're part of something larger than yourself, and underneath all of it sits an implicit promise. Your ideas will matter. The evidence you gather will shape the decisions that get made. Your commitment to the mission will carry you through the difficult days. It's a compelling story, yes, parts of it are true, but it leaves out almost everything you actually need to know before you show up. So now let's look at what the research and practitioner experience consistently show across 3 dimensions. First, the entry barriers are real and they're not neutral. The sector routinely expects entry-level candidates to arrive with 3 to 4 years of experience, a catch-22 that locks out large numbers of very qualified people before they even get started. What the standard career advice rarely says is that these barriers fall hardest on people from the Global South. Deep structural inequalities mean that even with the right credentials, the right experience, and the right language skills, someone from a less ideal place may still find themselves being told how to do development rather than being invited to lead it. The passport you carry shapes your trajectory in ways that have very little to do with the quality of your work. Second, once you're inside, the sector's internal culture often contradicts its stated values. Research across multiple countries has documented a dual salary system in which local staff are paid significantly less than expat colleagues, sometimes for doing identical work with equivalent qualifications. In some Pacific countries, this arrangement has been described by practitioners themselves as economic apartheid. That phrase is striking, yes, and it should be, because it names a profound irony. A sector built on poverty reduction, reproducing poverty-generating inequality within its own walls. And these are not anomalies. Researchers have traced them directly to broader colonial dynamics of power and privilege that the sector has inherited and never fully addressed. Third, the relationship between evidence, good ideas, and actual decisions is far messier than any training program suggests. Practitioners consistently describe a gap between how development is taught and how it actually operates, where donor priorities frequently override local needs, where politics shape resource allocation more than data does, and where best practices designed in one context fail to transfer to another. This isn't a fringe critique from outside the sector. It's what experienced practitioners say when they speak honestly about how the system works. Now here's the contradiction I want to name directly because it sits at the center of everything else. The international development sector positions itself as a force for justice, for equity, for the rights and dignity of people living through poverty or conflict. Organizations publish value statements about inclusion and equity, partnership, and locally led development. These are not cynical. Most people in this sector mean what they say, and yet the sector consistently reproduces internally many of the inequality it exists to address. There are documented cases of professionals with dual nationalities being assigned local salaries based on their passport, regardless of their actual background or cost of living. There is an unofficial ceiling that makes it structurally difficult for local nationals to rise to senior positions or to become experts themselves within organizations operating in their own countries. And this isn't simply a pay scale problem. It lives in whose expertise is considered authoritative, whose knowledge gets published, who sits at the table when decisions get made. Now, here's what makes this particularly difficult to navigate. Evidence alone doesn't automatically correct these dynamics. Evidence gets interpreted, funded, and acted upon inside the same power structures that produce the problem. When donor priorities conflict with local needs, it is rarely the evidence that decides the outcome. So now here's how I read this. Most people enter this sector with genuine motivation, and that matters. But idealism becomes a liability when the sector uses it as a substitute for accountability, when passion for the mission becomes the reason not to interrogate the system you're operating inside of, because the system has its own logic. What gets called white saviorism isn't simply about individual attitudes. It's a power structure, one that positions certain people as more capable, more credible, more developed, and directs their energies towards communities that are framed primarily as recipients. And critically, this is not only reproduced by white practitioners. It can be internalized and replicated across racial lines by anyone who has been socialized into the same hierarchy. So what does this mean practically? It means your positionality, where you are from, the passport you hold, the institutions you attended, will shape your experience in ways that may have nothing to do with the quality of your work. Knowing this in advance doesn't protect you from it per se, but it changes how you interpret what you encounter in your career. It also changes something else. It makes space for motivations that are beyond pure idealism. Wanting a financially stable career, wanting intellectual challenge, wanting expertise that compounds and transfers. These are legitimate reasons to be here. The earlier you can be honest with yourself about the full picture of what you need from this work, the more sustainable your presence in it will be. So here's the reframe. What I wish I knew before working in international development is not a list of career tips. It's an ethical orientation toward the gap between what this work promises and what it actually requires. The sector can do real good, but it also carries deep contradictions. And the practitioners who navigate it most effectively and most ethically tend to share a few things in common. They understand that good intentions don't automatically produce good outcomes, that evidence matters but doesn't govern, that ambiguity isn't a sign something is wrong, it's inherent to the work, that impact is usually non-linear, hard to attribute, and collective rather than individual. And they've made peace with the most important shift of all, from asking, did this work, to asking, what does working even mean in this context, and who gets to answer that? If development is genuinely about expanding human capability, then the people it's meant to serve have to be more than beneficiaries. They have to be the ones who are defining what capable looks like. So what does entering this sector with open eyes actually look like? 1, learn the structural history before you learn the technical frameworks. Before you become an expert in the logical framework or the theory of change template, you have to understand how colonialism shaped the architecture of the sector you're entering. Read Dambisa Moyo's That Aid on Aid Dependency or Teju Cole on the white savior industrial complex. Read the growing scholarship by practitioners from the Global South who are documenting these dynamics from lived experience. That historical context will make everything else make much more sense, including the office dynamics that will otherwise confuse you. 2, Be honest about your positionality and let that honesty do actual work. This means more than acknowledging privilege in a training session. It means asking, am I the right person to lead this or the right person to support it? What do I bring that's genuinely needed here? And where am I occupying space that a local expert should hold? These questions don't have permanent answers, but asking them consistently changes how you show up. 3, build skills that compound and know which ones actually matter in the field. Early career roles may not reflect your long-term trajectory. What compounds over time is contextual judgment, the ability to read a situation that doesn't match any framework you were trained on. Ethical reasoning, communication across power differences, the capacity to influence without formal authority, and above all, the ability to learn from people with direct experience of the problems you are trying to address. These are the skills that turn a technically competent practitioner into one who actually improves things. 4, understand funding structures as a political reality, not just a logistical one. Donor priorities shape what gets measured, what gets resourced, and what gets reported as success. Understanding this early doesn't make you cynical, it makes you strategic. It helps you identify where there's genuine room to push and where the constraints are structural rather than personal. 5, take your own sustainability very seriously. The idealism that brings people into this sector can become a liability if it makes drawing limits feel like a betrayal of the mission. Interrogate your organization's policies. Where are they defined? Whose context do they reflect? What assumptions are built in? These are not abstract questions. These determine whether you can sustain the work and whether the work in its current form is worth even sustaining. And here's the question I want to leave you with. Think about the gap between what you were told this work would look like and what it actually looked like once you were inside. What did that gap reveal about the sector structure, about your own positioning within them? And what would you do differently if you were starting again? That's not a hypothetical. For most people in this sector, it's the ongoing work. Now let's bring it all together. A career in international development can be deeply meaningful, but it can also be structurally complicated in ways that catch people off guard. The entry barriers are real and unequal. The internal culture often reproduces the inequalities the sector exists to address. The relationship between evidence and decisions is messier than the training suggests. Impact is nonlinear, collective, and frequently invisible on any timeline you can control. And the skills that matter most, contextual judgment, ethical reasoning, working with rather than for, are almost never the ones explicitly taught. None of this is a reason to walk away. It's the reason to walk in prepared. The most useful thing you can carry into this work is not a credential or a technical framework. It's the capacity to hold idealism and critical analysis in the same hand, to care deeply about what you're doing while also staying very honest about the system you're doing it inside of. That kind of practitioner isn't naive. They're not cynical either. There's something harder to produce and more valuable to the sector's long-term future. They're critically engaged and committed to the kind of learning that doesn't stop when the training ends. And that's exactly what the Learning Loop Guide is designed to support. This is for you. It's a free resource for thinking more intentionally about how learning happens within teams, within organizations and systems, because the development that matters most isn't always in the programs we design. It's in how we think and learn. The link to download this guide is in the description. Now, drop your own I wish I knew in the comments. What did the sector teach you that the job description never mentioned? This is Beyond Social Science, where we focus on practical learning for global change makers. If you learned something new today, I'll see you in the next video.